Hey guys, it's Joseph Johnson with Ultimate Athlete Concepts. During this time of kind of craziness with coronavirus, a lot of us have had time to kind of maybe get back to doing some things that had been too hard to get into the schedule, me included. So what I've decided to do is to go ahead with something that I've been thinking about for a while, which is a podcast that was separate of ones where I interview authors or other people in the field and do kind of a monologue on some of the issues in the field. But like the other podcasts, I've got to get a shout out first to Bob Thernhofer at Loyola. Thank you very much for the gear. Appreciate that very much. This is kind of got a different feel. So this is going to be kind of a debut of what I'd call the CTC Podcast, the Cut the Check Podcast. And what does that mean? Well, I hear a lot of discussion on philosophical ideas or theories or whatever, and people talking about things that, in my opinion, don't really matter. The only thing that matters is getting the check cut. Thereby, the CTC Podcast, we want to provide material that relates to the athlete getting a scholarship, a medal, or a paycheck. And if it doesn't do one of those things, in my opinion, it's not really worth anything. So with that, we're kind of going to start with at square one, the very fundamental kind of issues, and I'd love to get your feedback on them as well. But what's most glaring, or I think probably the biggest problem or mistake that maybe is made, is presuming that sports science and sports performance and stuff is a scientific field in the United States. It's not. We have some scientists that are working in the area, maybe doing some research on a few things, but the facts are that it's not a system in the United States. It's not a field. You can get a degree in a related field and then kind of muddle your way through trying to figure out how to develop athletic performance, but it's not a field in the United States. And that's something that's kind of hard for people to kind of grapple with, but that's a fact. And we're not producing any new information. There's nothing new beyond what the Soviets or the East Germans or maybe some other countries had done previously. We're really not breaking any new ground. And most of the time, we're either reinventing the wheel or we are poorly interpreting data from previous generations. But we're not adding on to it, and it's not improving much. And I think if you look around, you can say that that's pretty well validated. Why is that the case? Well, they're not degrees in the United States towards coaching in the performance end. You can get a degree in exercise physiology, kinesiology, exercise science, biomechanics, but none of them really relate to a higher level athlete. We don't have like a centralized way of looking at our high level athletes and how do we train them. Most of that is really broken into, all these disparate places where each, maybe Olympic athlete has their own coach. Maybe one coach coaches multiple Olympic athletes, but none of it's done under a systematic approach, the way the Soviets did or the East Germans did, where the research is happening, at a high level with a lot of different, really bright scientists, and then they're communicating back down to the coaches. The coaches are trying those things, communicating back to the scientists that, hey, this worked, that didn't work, or here's a new idea. Can you guys research this? That's not happening in the U.S. So that's, it's a fundamental issue towards, the development of better athletes, or better coaching, I should say. So what does that mean? It means that, the expertise level in the United States is just low. This is a fact. And the real experts, on the global level, most of them aren't Americans. I would say almost all of them aren't American. Does that make it bad? No, we got to start from somewhere. So I think that that's the purpose of doing this podcast, is to start from somewhere and kind of like look at square one, and then where do we go, from here in the United States. Obviously, with our business, UAC, we've been publishing books in the field for about 15 years now. We're at 20 some books. And obviously, we appreciate people buying books from us and educating themselves in that way. But I still get a ton of questions, emails, phone calls, from coaches all over, asking my, opinion or advice on matters that they're presented with their own athletes. So with that in mind, I wanted to kind of just set the table for this whole concept of, where are we headed and where are we going with this, and how can we, do it better. There's a lot of fundamental concepts that have been missed in the United States. And I think one of the things that is interesting for people to think about, I'll hear a lot of things, concepts maybe that are kind of thrown about that are accepted as fact. And it's interesting, if you just ask why the person does this or they do that, they don't know. I get coaches call me all the time. They say, okay, here's what I'm doing. What do you think? And I'll say, well, why? And invariably, they don't know why. It's because they heard it somewhere. Maybe it's a good idea. Maybe it worked. Maybe it didn't. Nobody ever asks the results, like hard numbers. Like they were running this fast. Now they're running this fast, or they jumped this high. Now they jump this high. It's we get off onto tangents that don't really matter, to be honest with you. The only thing that matters is the athlete perform better at the thing they came to perform better at. When they came to you for that, because we could say, well, they're way more flexible now, or now they've got good range of motion, or whatever. But if they can't perform better, who cares? And a lot of things have become tangential, and I don't want to take shots at anything in particular. There's a lot of things that really, really don't matter. Really don't matter. The only thing that matters is the athlete perform better at the thing that they came to you for. If they're not, you've wasted their time and your time. So how do we do that? How do you look at this? Well, always keeping your mind on the thing that matters, keeping the main thing the main thing. If it doesn't relate back to that, then you've got to ask, well, what are we doing? And we also got to ask, of the things that we do care about, are we doing things that will affect that in a positive way? So if the athlete comes to you, let's say they're a baseball pitcher and they throw 80 miles an hour. Are they throwing faster now after, let's say, 6 months of training? Are they throwing 83 now, or whatever the case may be? Then that's progress. And then the next question is that good compared to everyone else? So you might be getting a good result. Is it as good as it can be? Is it better than everyone else? If it is, then, you're still learning and trying to figure it out, but you're on the right track. If it's not as good as other people, then you want to find out what they're doing. To me, I always have looked at it from the perspective of, this so-and-so is getting really good results. Let's find out what they're doing. I wasn't bashful about calling or, whatever, bugging people. The difference for me now and most everyone else is that I can call one of the world's experts in that area and ask them questions. And that makes it, easier. I'm lucky, to be honest with you. I'm not smarter, just luckier than most people, in that I can call an expert, not only get the theoretical, answer, but the practical one of how do you do that? How does that play itself out in the practical setting? Because, we could talk about how the training ideas all day long, but tomorrow the athlete has to train. What are they going to do and why? And then how does that get developed from there? How do we progress from that? Right? Because, I hear people will say, well, we've got a workout plan. Well, there's no such thing as a workout. That's like saying there's a plan for playing the piano. It's weekly lessons and feedback, changes and adjustments, maybe a new way of looking at it, new way of teaching it. There isn't a plan per se. there's an overarching principles, and then they're applied. And then as the athlete learns them or, struggles with them, you got to find a different way of doing it. Or you apply a training method and it doesn't work. Or it's a negative. That can happen. Or, maybe it is positive, but it's not as positive as it could be. Maybe there's more there for you. And I'll give you some of my thoughts on that. Like, what's wrong? Like, what are the biggest impediments in the United States? So first of all, I think most importantly is that it's a little bit muddy because the United States has an incredible genetic pool of talent. We have the best talent in the world. There's no question about that. We have such a great mixture of ethnicities and nationalities that produce, phenomenal athletes. I don't think there's any question about that we have the best genetics. So that kind of discounts the need for being better at the science. And so what ends up happening is the field of strength and conditioning, as we call it, is very literal, strength and conditioning. But more importantly, it's a cultural thing. So when you hear a coach say, and I've asked coaches this, and I've gotten the same answer most of the time. When I ask them, what's the purpose of strength and conditioning, and a lot of them will tell me to build character. That seems odd. Why would you use strength and conditioning? I thought we were going to try to get better at the sport or the event. Building character. I mean, try building character with a 100-meter sprinter. He needs to run faster. So it's nonsensical, really. So it's become cultural. You'll hear people saying, you got to compete. You got to give your all. You've got to, find something in yourself that you didn't know you had. It's nonsense. You have to be disciplined. You have to be driven, no question. And you do have to work hard. That's not a doubt. As a matter of fact, it's very demanding being a high-level athlete. But the effort should be expended in a way that is value added. That means that if we're going to spend this energy, we're going to get out of it what we were looking for, which is improvement in the skill or the sport or the event, whatever the case may be. We're not wasting our time with things that don't matter. So what are the biggest deficits? Because of that, we think that we need to push the athletes further and further with with what they're doing. I think that probably the biggest error that happens in the United States is overvolumizing. That means we have just a volume of stuff and it's too much. And so one of the reasons I think why our injury rates are really high in the United States are because of that. Some people will say, well, we think it's specialization from an early age. That's circumstantial evidence. I don't really think that's the problem. It's the volume of work done in the specialization. So, yeah, if you throw a lot, let's say in baseball, and you take 6 months off, you're going to get time to recover, and then you're going to be able to, kind of take a rest, and you hadn't gotten over a threshold of injury. But that's not really necessarily the best preventive mechanism. And it's also kind of deceiving in that sense. It's the volume of work that was done in that phase where you were doing it where the injuries can occur, I would say mostly. So like if you're specializing all year round, but you keep the volume low, the odds are you won't get hurt. If you keep it in a reasonable level that is appropriate for the age and the development of that particular athlete. So I think that is probably the primary one. And one of the other ones is we'll go from when we do get them in like preseasons in high school. One of the things that's really troublesome is that most high school preseasons are a week to 2 weeks long. So you might have a kid who hasn't done anything in the last 6 months, and the coach feels compelled to get them in shape in a short period of time, which can't happen. Number one, you can't microwave fitness or short track it. It takes what it takes. So what happens is they come in, they haven't been doing anything. The coach feels like he needs to really, just run them to death to get them in shape. And then what ends up happening is the kids get hurt. Now, they may not get hurt in the conditioning, initially, although they do. And you'll see in August every year with the NFL, guys go down, dropping like flies, and there's no contact. It's because they went from 0 to 100, and I think that was probably, a big factor for a lot of those types of injuries. And then also just, the idea of doing something, let's say like right before a game. Let's say you have a game on Friday and you run them hard on Wednesday, for example. They're not going to recover before Friday. So there's no positive benefit to that. Really, you want them to maintain. So really, I think the whole design in the United States in high school is incorrect. And that's part of the problem. I don't necessarily think it's a coach's fault. It's kind of like misinformation plus kind of feeling this pressure. The whole system doesn't make sense because we're not training on a year-round basis just to develop and maintain the fitness level and the performance level. Going from 0 to 100, it just doesn't work. And in 2 weeks, you really can't create, high-level fitness for somebody who hasn't done anything for the previous 20 weeks. You're not going to be able to do it. The best thing to do in season, in truth, if they're not already in shape, it's not going to happen. So the only thing you can do is try not to hurt them. Maybe, slowly kind of bring up your volume, maybe a little bit. But if they're in fairly decent shape, I would say conditioning during the season doesn't make a whole lot of sense. A lot of it will kind of detract from the athlete's performance, and it'll probably raise your rate of injury occurrence. You see this a lot. But it's foolhardy to do that. It's impossible for an athlete to be in season, should say preseason, and get in really good shape in 2 weeks. It's not going to happen. He's probably going to get hurt, and he'll be sore, can't walk. And the other thing is his performance will drop. We've done experiments with that after 1 week of training camp and test the athletes again. And, one of the key performance indicators and find out they dropped super low after just 1 week of being in preseason. And I don't think that the coaches in any of those situations would realize that's what was going on because you're not testing them again and you're not like, you're eyeballing everything. And because everyone's slower, everyone's performing, not as good, it's really hard for it to stand out too. So it's a little deceiving to make you think that that's the case. So with that being the case, a year-round approach makes a lot of sense. And on that topic of specialization, it's true, you don't need to specialize. You should play a lot of different sports, especially when the kid's younger. Try a lot of different things because you develop other skills. Makes a lot of sense. When it's soccer, play soccer. When it's basketball, play basketball. Baseball, play baseball. And that will help develop other motor skills for other sports. On the other hand, at around 15 years old, like in high school, if the athlete wants to play at the next level and they're not a genetic freak, you want to pick a sport. It's a good idea. If you're really aiming for a scholarship and you're not quite there yet and you need to improve, it's probably smart to pick a sport to maximize. Now, you don't have to. You could be someone who is maybe close and you feel like you could play both and still get it done. It's no problem with that either. But to say don't specialize in high school, I think is not correct. If you're wanting to play beyond high school and you still need to improve, specializing makes sense. It's not the specialization, it's the overvolumization of what you're doing, if that makes sense. So looking at this from that perspective, we want to kind of look at developing the athlete from the ground up, and this is where a lot of training methods come in that might be unique to or new to people. And these will be ones that we'll talk about in the next few podcasts. And I'm going to try to do several of these all back to back. But I'd love to get questions too, as it relates, because I know there's a lot of questions that come up, and I get a lot of them already. So it's nice just to maybe get them in this kind of medium and be able to answer them for a lot of people at the same time. But keep in mind that what's being done at the college and pro level, and a lot of people look at this and say, well, so-and-so, he's a coach at the pro level, high school, or not high school, but college level. And, he works with a lot of great athletes. And so he must really know what he's doing. And here's the question you always need to ask. What was the athlete doing before they met performance-wise? And what are they doing now? So if the athlete was running this fast, what's he running now? Or whatever the case, how hard did he throw before they met and after? That's all that matters. By association means nothing. I get calls from pro coaches, guys who are working with pro athletes, major D1 schools, literally all varieties from all over the world. And I can tell you it's not that sophisticated. At the pro level, the question is, well, if you see somebody get drafted and he's working with, strength and conditioning coach for that team, did he get faster the whole time he was there? Or did he jump higher, get quicker, or whatever the case may be? And the answer is, by and large, no, they don't get better. And why is that? Is that the coach's fault? No, it's not. I think it's like a broad spectrum answer. It's the way that, like in the pro level, a lot of those guys do their own thing either way. So the strength and conditioning coach really is kind of in a bad position because he works them mainly during the season, which is not the time really to make improvements, more to maintain, make sure they don't get hurt, where the off season is the time to improve. And yet the coach isn't with them during that time. So it's kind of paradoxical. It doesn't make any sense. At the collegiate level, you've got 100 guys on a football team, maybe. It's going to be really hard to get things done in a systematic way. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it is problematic. There are issues there because the athletes need to understand what they're doing and kind of understand how to diagnose themselves, even like, is this being done correctly? It's a lot more cerebral than people would think. It's not as much just physical effort. A lot of it's cerebral too. You've got to be thinking and understanding, why am I doing what I'm doing? Does it make sense? So I think that's something else that needs to be considered in this discussion. So it's not taking shots at anybody or criticizing. I think it's a systemic problem, and not really a problem. It's just a lack. The other countries were very, like the Soviet Union and these terms, were very purposeful. They wanted to win medals, and they didn't care how it got done. And some of that was not ethical, or it wasn't moral, and which is neither here nor there. The science component that they used to get better was very valid and one that we should be taking advantage of. It doesn't make any sense not to. So with that in mind, I think you kind of just look outside of convention, look outside of what you've heard or what's possible. And one of the biggest questions is, what is possible? How much can an athlete get better? I can tell you from experience, they can get a lot better, a lot. And this is by using a systematic, incremental, step-by-step process of well thought out strategy and application of methods that make sense for the athlete at that particular juncture. So anyway, I'd like to hear questions on this. We're going to go right into some other subject matter here soon, and kind of do this thing one step at a time. But I'd love to hear any kind of comments and questions on maybe things that we could talk about that would be useful for those in the field. So until then, this is Joseph signing out. Talk to you soon.